In this video, I want to talk to you about creating custom chains and using templates as tools to really streamline your workflow. Within the creative realm, creativity and productivity seems to really thrive around speed. It thrives around kind of avoiding roadblocks and reducing the number of obstacles between ideas that are in your head to the actual listening back to those ideas once they've been created. And the same thing goes with with mixdowns. This is a lengthy process. For me, a typical mixdown can take anywhere between 4 and 7 hours typically. So I want to make sure that I have some shortcuts in place that will really streamline that process. One of those absolutely key shortcuts is creating a custom chain that I can apply to every channel when I'm going through and doing my forensic work. What I've found over time is that the processes that I use tend to be the same on every channel. Now, it's not to say that I would necessarily use all of the plugins within a kind of custom chain on every channel. You think of this maybe as a channel strip, but it's really useful simply to have them all there as an option in case you decided to use them. So how do we go about doing that? And what would you have in a typical channel strip? Well, here's one that I have created for you to have a look at. I'm just going to show you very briefly how to do this as well. Like if I click on this group of different plugins, and then we right click or control click on a Mac and ungroup them. So you may have gone into your audio effects plugins, grabbed a whole bunch of these, put them together like this, and they're all sitting as kind of standalone plugins, but they're being used in serial, and that means the audio comes in here on the left hand side and it goes through each of these one by one until it comes out of the end here. In order to group those together as a as a series of plugins, you simply select them all with your mouse, and that's holding down the shift key, and then you can click anywhere on them, right click anywhere on any of them, and this dialog will come up where you can group them together. And on a Mac, that's a Command G command, and I believe it's Control G on a PC. So now you've grouped all of these together, so you can easily turn them on and turn them off with a single click of the mouse on this kind of on the beginning of this group. Now, what would you have typically in a group? Well, what I have here is I go through the same process each time, and the order that I've produced these videos in for this series of videos is in the order that I generally would use these plugins. So I start off with, here I'm using a Pro Q3. If you don't have this particular EQ, then you can obviously use EQ8 from that's available within Ableton. The reason I use this is it's a nicer, smoother interface. Quality of sound is excellent, and what I particularly like about it for these low cut filters is that you're able to choose a whole range of different slope types for the filters, which you don't really have that level of control within EQ8, which is a slight drawback. I like to have a relatively steep cutoff at the bottom end, as long as there's not too much bass signal going in around that area. If there is, it can have the effect, if you've got like a brick wall cutoff, it can have the effect of really exaggerating that exact point where the cutoff happens, and that can create this sort of gnarly sort of resonance spike. Anyway, we start with a low cut filter and sometimes a high cut filter, and I would apply those on this same initial plugin in the chain. Now next up I have two instances of EQ8, and this is purely for convenience, but the first of these is a mid version of the plugin and the second is a side version of the plugin. And you can see here that I'm actually treating the audio quite differently between the two. Now when you switch EQ8 into mid-side mode, which you do during this mode using this mode switch, you can toggle in between mid and side easy enough. I personally prefer to have in the case of EQ8 anyway, I personally prefer to have two separate instances of it. Just sort of focuses the mind maybe a little bit more on the specifics of what the stereo and mono content are actually up to. From there, having done that kind of basic correction to the sound and cleaned it up, it's now going into a compressor. We spoke about compression in another video as part of this series, which you can check out on my YouTube. And then from the compressor we go into the saturator, and then we go to EQ8 again, and the reason for that is that more often than not saturation will add unwanted bottom end to your mix, so this is like a further form of cleanup that's happening here. And then from there we go into our limiter. Now I've put a utility just at the end of this chain here, which I'm using to mitigate the level boost that I've created by running things quite hard, in this case, into a limiter. What that does is it just gives you a bit of a head check, really. What I've done with the utility is I've taken the same amount of gain out as I've effectively added by smashing the thing into a limiter. So that way I can actually compare the sound of the unprocessed version of the loop with the sound of the processed version of the loop and have them both sit at roughly the same volume. Otherwise the temptation is always to go for the thing that sounds louder, and it certainly would sound louder if this utility wasn't in place. Once I was actually bouncing this track down or maybe freezing this part, I'd take the utility off and you know, and have the extra volume. I can always then turn that down in my my level metering. Right at the end here I have an instance of spectrum as well, and this is used in a very specific way. This is something that I may use like in the mastering process, but it can be really useful as a tool in actually figuring out exactly what's happening within your audio sample. So it's a lot more of a detailed tool than you have within these EQ8s. It's only really helpful if you use it in quite a specific way. So if you just drop a spectrum onto your track, it comes in like auto mode, and you'll see here the auto mode just basically, it's not telling me anything that's particularly useful. It's just giving me the entire kind of spectrum. Now if you change that mode and you change it to range and then set the first of these parameters to say 1, and that is 1 dB over there at the top, you can then set the range of the bottom end of that. So if we set that to like -30 or something, that then gives us a much more detailed look at where the real peaks in our audio are happening. And you can slow down the refresh rate there. Now the benefit of that is I can see that there's very much kind of the biggest peak in this sound is actually happening by hovering over it. You can see that it's actually happening bang on around about 40 Hertz. So if I wanted to see what the loudest parts of that sample were, like where in the frequency spectrum, this is a really good tool at doing that. And I can then go into my kind of mid-side EQ here and get a little bit more granular with the way that I deal with those frequencies. So I could, for example, go to my my EQ8 here, and let's open it up. We know that it was at 40 hertz that we had this this kind of peak happening. So then, you know, you might put in a little filter there at 40 hertz. Let's just make it a very, very narrow one, and then drop it down. So you could just lose some of that frequency there, and that would ultimately give you a touch more headroom within your mix overall. You may also want to bear in mind that you have a bass tone that's actually happening at that same tone. And if that was the case, then, you know, you might actually want to take a whole load of extra gain out of that to leave space for the bass tone. So that's why I use Spectrum as part of this audio effect rack. Once you're happy with what you have and you're pretty convinced that you're going to be using this on a regular basis on each of your parts, just to kind of get really sort of in the weeds with the way that the part sounds and cleaning it up, all you need to do is go over here to the far left where the save button is, this little disc icon, and then you would save your able channel strip, and that way it's there for you know, you just literally would drag and drop it onto a new channel, and each time it's set exactly as you've saved it effectively. So bearing that in mind, you wouldn't want all of these changes to be present. So you'd really want to go through these and just make sure everything is completely flat, and then save it as a blank canvas. But that will save you so much time on each channel. You know exactly the process that you're going to go through, and all of the tools are there at your fingertips. The other area that's worth considering is the area of templates when it comes to Ableton. And what I particularly like about these templates is that they and I'll just open one of these up while I'm talking to you. So what I really like about these templates is that they come completely ready for action. So you can color code your different channels as you want them. You can add as many channels or as few channels as you want. You can also set up things where, as you can see here on this like mixing template that I have, and this is for my mixing, mastering, mentoring business, where people send me their stem mixes to be done. Now each of these channels has my own template on it. This is exactly what I was talking about before. It has my own kind of custom chain, and I use this chain on every channel. It's already set here. None of these windows are actually open, so I'm not opening up the project with a whole range of different random plugin windows everywhere that I then have to close. My master channel is set with this headphone correction setup that I use on all of my my mixing and mastering. And then, as I said, all of these individual channels are just good to go. So literally all I have to do is drag and drop the stems that people have sent me into these particular slots, and I'm ready to start processing, and that can be a huge time saver. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where you'll find a whole bunch of similar production-based content. Also, check out my website at mixingmasteringmentoring.com, where I offer one-to-one mentoring sessions, as well as a range of mixing and mastering services. And you can also check out some free PDF downloads that will really help you turbocharge your productions. And one other thing to mention is, if you want to download the custom chain that I built within this tutorial, then you'll find it in the description below. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.